Hi, I'm crack senior editor Josh Sargent, and we're recording this video right in the worst part of the worst election ever. If any of you are watching from the future and have access to time travel, please come save me. I don't want to be here anymore. No? Yes? Anything? Are we getting any weird feedback in the microphone? That was worth a shot. Anyway, a lot of the most common complaints about our political process actually aren't true, so I'm going to go through some of these misconceptions and hopefully, at some point, get rescued by time travelers. Fingers crossed. I know how to do basic math, so I know that it feels like your vote is picking the next president the same way calling customer service will get your internet working. It's worse if you don't even live in a swing state. If you're all but guaranteed to go one direction, your vote is either a trendy act of defiance or a victory lap. There's even a philosophical term for this. It's called the paradox of voting. And it says that for the rational voter, the pain in the ass of going to the voting booth always outweighs the potential benefits. Philosophers literally don't know why anyone votes. But take that with a grain of salt, because there's another paradox of voting that means something completely different, so it's possible philosophers just aren't very smart. Because in the real world, voting totally matters. And not just in that everyone should do their part, every vote is a special snowflake way. It turns out politicians actually pay attention to who votes and tend to change their policies accordingly. Nowhere is this clearer in American history than in the years following the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which removed racist anti-voting requirements like this Louisiana literacy test, which denied black citizens the right to vote unless they could do things like print the word vote upside down but in the correct order, and whatever the hell these words mean. When the VRA was found unconstitutional, black communities all through the South started voting and immediately got more attention from their local elected officials in the form of basic road repairs and working streetlights. But it doesn't always take a piece of legislation. It turns out that a more active voting population is just better represented. After studying 30 years of voter participation in state legislation, analysts found that when a bigger percentage of poor people vote, those communities also have a higher minimum wage, stricter predatory lending laws, better health care, and in general, more policies that benefit people with low income. Not because poor voters are always getting the candidate they want, but because the candidate that does win wants to keep as many of their voters happy as possible so they can keep having a job. It's kind of like how if you have one friend who always wants to go to a strip club, even though nobody else wants to go to a strip club, you're eventually gonna go to a strip club, just to shut them up. Hang out in a strip club even though you don't want to be there is democracy at its best. All politicians lie is one of the few things that every voter knows in their heart is true. Think of all the famous lies. We were told that Guantanamo Bay would close, that's still open. Bush's lies got us into a war in the Middle East. Clinton's presidency was basically an 8-year clandestine fest. This is why we need a political outsider like Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders dropped out, so Donald Trump. Well, if you're writing off the entire process because you assume everybody is lying to you, the math just isn't on your side. I mean, sure, Obama is famous for lying about Gitmo, and Bush's lies got so bad that Green Day named an album after him. But if you look at the big picture, politicians are actually fairly honest. Like, it feels weird to say that, like I'm selling out, but according to several studies over the past forever, politicians try and keep an average between 2/3 and 3/4 of their campaign promises. 538 even put together a handy graph on the subject. I like graphs. But I also understand that numbers are boring, so let's focus on our most recent president. According to the PolitiFact Truthometer, President Obama has kept 45% of his promises and compromised on 25% while outright breaking 22%. 6% are, as of right now, not yet in the works, but overall that means he's been about 70% honest. So the graph was right 100% of the time. Now, let me be clear, calling out when politicians lie is rad and nobody should get extra credit just for keeping their word. But if you say that your political opinions are based on the idea that all politicians lie all the time, that just means you are too lazy to make a graph. American voting participation is bad. According to a Pew study of voter turnout in developed nations, we ranked about here. Why? Is this a millennial thing? No. It turns out that there's a ton of very obvious things that affect voter turnout. For one thing, the nations with the highest voter turnout, Belgium and Turkey, have compulsory voting. Other countries like Sweden and Germany automatically register you to vote when you're eligible, unlike the US, which makes you register yourself. The UK doesn't register you automatically, but I hear they harass you into doing it. Ask the UK people in the comment sections. I don't really know. What I do know is that the US is one of the few countries that insists on holding its elections on a workday, on Tuesday. Israel and South Korea hold their elections during the week too, but they also make that day a holiday. Meanwhile, Belgium, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, New Zealand, and most of the other countries that beat us in the Pew graph hold their elections on the weekend, when no one has to be at work. So fewer people have to make a decision between voting and eating. So why does America do this in the first place? Well, It's for farmers. In the bad old days, it would take a whole day for farmers to travel from towns to vote. And they couldn't travel on Sunday because of God, so it had to be Tuesday. So, I mean, yeah, we can't change that. By the way, this is probably why voter turnout in the US overwhelmingly favors the rich. Rich people can just pop out of the office in their helicopter to vote or send their valet to do it for them. I don't know, it's not my job to know how rich people live. An election is important, both for the future of the country and for future Facebook voting. So, is it that crazy to imagine someone sneaking in there to ruin everything with voter fraud? Doesn't it make perfect sense that 34 states have laws requiring voter identification at the polls despite the fact 11% of Americans don't have any form of photo ID? And isn't that a worthy price to pay for a fair election? No, because voter fraud never happens. In 2012, there was about 1 case of voter fraud per 15 million votes. And of the 1 billion votes cast between 2000 and 2014, there were only 31 possible cases of fraudulent voting. Possible. Remember, most people don't think their vote matters, so trying to commit voting fraud is sort of like campaigning for your third-party candidate to a pack of wolves. Very dangerous and unlikely to make a difference for several reasons. That's not to say that voter fraud doesn't exist, just that it's not the kind of thing you can stop by making it harder for citizens to vote. The real danger is actually the opposite. Like that time in 2000 in Florida when they threw out 50,000 votes from people who had the same name and birthday as convicted felons in other states without even bothering to check that they were indeed the same person. Oh, and the company that compiled this list, DBT, was paid $4.3 million to replace the firm that charged $5,700 per year to do the same thing, because the latter firm was not preventing enough people from voting. Oh, and right before the Florida Secretary of State threw out all those votes, DBT offered to cross-check the names with address histories and financial records, but the state of Florida told them not to bother, even though we now know for sure that a lot of those voters were, in fact, eligible. Oh, and through sheer coincidence, most of those people were black. Oh, and whenever DBT is asked about this, they tend to run screaming from the interview. I'm getting off topic. Go read this article. I should finish my list. Sure, there are tons of elections throughout the year, but the presidency, it's the big enchilada, right? It has to be. It's all anyone's talking about on Facebook. But next time your city council member is up, your Facebook feed will just be sports, humble brags, and memories from 10 years ago that Facebook thinks you want to be reminded of. No, if you're politically savvy or have just been paying attention to the format of this video, then you can tell that that's not true. Most of the things in your life that you deal with every day aren't going to be affected by the presidency as much as they are by your local elected officials. Worried about crime? You can vote for your sheriff. You ride your bike to work? You can find a city council member who wants to make better bike lanes and vote for them. And though there's a federal minimum wage, your state minimum wage is probably the one that's more relevant to your life. The point is, if you're only freaking out about important issues during an election year, you're kind of a political poser. Like Green Day. So unless you want to be an American idiot, I am not doing that joke. So if you want to stay knowledgeable about politics and keep your outrage at a healthy simmer no matter what year it is, then some things you can do to keep a track of things are download the Congress app for your smartphone, visit Project VoteSmart at votesmart.com, or, those are just the first two things that came up when I Googled this. I wasn't gonna look more into it because it's boring. It's really boring. All the things that make America great are really boring, but we have to do them anyway. So, how's it looking on those time travelers? Are we, Nope. All right, I figured we wouldn't have the budget. So, end the video, I guess. Hey, thanks for watching our video. Please like and subscribe. And if you want to vote in your upcoming election, scroll down to a different tab and do the research yourself, because I researched this video. Pull your own weight.